Welcome, everyone. I am so excited to have you all here. Today's going to be a phenomenal discussion, and what we're going to be talking about is how to define and refine your 2023 DEI strategies during a recession. We are now facing some economic uncertainties. We're seeing layoffs, hiring freezes happen across many industries, mostly tech, right? But I know that a lot of companies are impacted at this time. If you are here because you are directly responsible or actively involved in your organization's DEI efforts, we're going to give you so many gems to really take away today and actually begin to implement some things in your organization. The question that comes up a lot is DEI a nice to have or a must to have, right? We saw in 2020 where there were so many new commitments and everyone was engaged and happy and excited about DE&I. And to be quite honest, we're starting to see some of that fade away. And as those budgets get cut, right, as those uncertainties present themselves, business leaders are faced with the question of, do we cut DEI? But if we cut it, how do we keep that momentum going? And so we want to make sure that you all have again, some key takeaways to think about what can I do in my organization to continue to build that momentum so that we don't lose that momentum that we really started a few years ago. Some of you all might be worried about that or might be challenged with having to do a lot with a little. So if anything, I just want to let you know this. We are not here to talk to you. We're here to talk with you. We're here to be in conversation with you. Right? We want to hear from you. We want to know what your challenges are, what your concerns are, right? This is a conversation, and this is the first time that we're doing this. So I'm joined here with our wonderful leadership team at Perfeqta, and I know they'll be able to introduce themselves in a second. But remember, we're here for you all. We're not here for ourselves. So don't be shy. Say hello in the chat. We have some poll questions. We have some questions that we just want you all to, really respond to. And this is also a time for us to build community. One thing that we have noticed, even with our client partners, is that when you're involved in the work that impacts people, talent, HR, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, sometimes that work can feel exhausting. That work can feel lonely. That work can be tiring. And who can you go to for that support? So we at Perfeqta want to be able to provide that community. I think this is going to be a great networking space. This is the first of many. This is going to be a monthly webinar, really a conversation that we're going to be having on various topics. But again, today is all about what's going on in the market right now. How can we not lose momentum? Because there are so many benefits to building an inclusive and equitable workplace. Question for you all in the chat. I think you all are already doing it here, which is great. Let us know where you're joining from. Let us know where you're joining from. It looks like we have folks all over the state. So I know we got Chicago in the house, Charlotte in the house, LA, San Francisco. Shout out to all of our West Coast folks, Richmond, New York, cold England. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I want to make a trip to England later this year to see some of our clients out there. We got Oregon in the house, DC. Keep saying hello, y'all. Again, you all might be able to build some phenomenal connections in this space as well, too. So I'm going to shift us here to the next slide. Again, happy to meet you all. Pleasure. My name is Letitia, and I'm the CEO of Perfeqta. Let me tell you a little bit about Perfeqta before I tell you all about myself. So Perfeqta, if you're wondering, where did this name come from? It is so unique. Perfeqta stands for Performance, Equity, and Talent. Our mission is to build high-performing teams and put equity back into talent. We truly believe that no organization is fully inclusive until the most marginalized person feels safe and that there is a strong sense of belonging, really for everyone. We do this work through consulting. We do this work through trainings, as well as coaching. And so some of the things that we have consulted our clients on has been on how to create and launch a DEI roadmap, how to build DEI committees and councils, how to launch or relaunch employee resource groups, how to upskill ERG leaders. And a lot of our trainings have been focused on allyship, inclusive leadership, bias, and privilege. And in the last year, we have facilitated over 30 trainings to over 2,000 participants. We are going to also be sharing with you all a DEI framework. This is a methodology that our phenomenal team has put together that will help our client partners and help you all as well assess the maturity of DEI in your organization. And I'll tell you all a little bit about that later. I don't want to give too much away, but it's going to give you a solid framework to take back to your leadership team that gives you clear examples of where you can begin to implement some things starting sooner than later, right? Time is of the essence here. And with layoffs happening, with hiring freezes happening, with employees getting concerned and worried about the safetiness of their environment, this is the time to double down on your DE&I efforts. So really excited about that. My name is Letitia. I'm joined here with Dr. Tamara Diaz and Bryce, who leads brand development, business development. Tamara leads culture here. But my background specifically is in leadership, career development, diversity and inclusion, as well as talent acquisition strategies. So I will now turn it over to our team.
Thanks so much, Letitia, for that amazing intro. Hi, everyone. I'm so excited that you all joined us during lunchtime on a Tuesday. Nonetheless, shout out to everybody who has their snacks. Get comfortable, eat whatever you got to do during this time. And I believe I saw some folks in the chat from my hometown, 804, Richmond, Virginia. I'm 804 born and raised, so shout out to y'all, sending some love to the capital city. I'm Tamara. I have the honor and privilege of working alongside these two phenomenal leaders every single day at Perfeqta as the Director of Culture and Partnerships. Short story, I just help our team work better together. I keep us going so that we can keep helping you all. And my background, I bring a decade of experience across K through 12 higher education and nonprofit settings, most recently having been a CEO for 6+ years of a grassroots organization. I am an educator at heart. And so I'm all about taking theory and big concepts and breaking it down into chunks that you can take action on. It's the middle school teacher in me that will never leave. And I will absolutely bring that out for you all today in our time together. So again, engage with us. We want to hear from you. We want to talk with you, and we want to make this a beneficial experience for you. Grateful that you're here. I'll turn it over to Bryce.
Appreciate that. Welcome, everybody. I'm seeing two of my hometowns. So originally from New Jersey, New York, but moved here to Charlotte after 9/11, unfortunately. But super excited that everyone is here. Again, hate to be a broken record. This is meant to be a space where people can feel authentic and speak on things that are really at top of mind. I am the Director of Business and Brand Development at Perfeqta. Really, with my background, it's been mostly with design thinking. So working with a lot of high growth startups, working for and with organizations in the Fortune 1000, NASA, Google, you name it. But really here at Perfeqta, what I am always attempting to do with our client partners, because that's what we call them, is really just to find the best way to commit to change. And that looks like processes, that looks like policies, that looks like culture, that looks like systems, and really finding a way to enable that kind of diversity to thrive and have our client partners really see those benefits. But for me, just extremely excited that we've been able to kick off this year with this very first webinar, and looking forward to everyone responding to some of our questions and really getting into the thick of this very challenging but rewarding work.
Thank you. So why are we here today? We thought it would be important for us to have this conversation because there are a lot of questions that we're hearing from our client partners around where should I be focusing my efforts as it relates to DE&I during an economic downturn, when I am feeling pressured to keep that momentum going, but also knowing that my resources might be limited. So we're going to give you all some strategies there on really where to focus that time, depending on really the maturity of your organization. The next one we're going to focus on is showing you all Perfeqta's DEI framework that we've created and how you can move through the 3 phases of our framework, which is structuring DE&I, scaling DE&I, and sustaining DE&I. Some of you might be in that structuring phase where you're really focused on figuring out what to launch, when to launch it, what resources are going to be needed, and also maybe facing some pressure from leadership team. And then also from employees that really want to feel a greater sense of belonging. You want to be able to get to that sustaining DE&I phase. And that's really where DE&I is embedded across your employee life cycle, up, down, and across the organization. And it's also beginning to inform some of those business strategies overall, right? And then the last thing here is how you can define and measure DEI effectiveness through our 6 success categories. The question that comes up there from our client partners is, how do we know if what we're doing is working? So you want to make sure that we're giving you all some tangible things to think about as you leave today's conversation. So I have a poll question that we are going to launch right now. And let's go ahead and talk about this. The question is, how many of you have been impacted by layoffs, by hiring freezes, or budget cuts? Or do you know someone that has been? So I'm going to, as you all are putting in your responses here, it looks like majority of us have said yes. I would love to invite Tamara and Bryson here to talk through some of these results we're seeing.
Just kind of, initial thoughts that this brings up for me. As soon as I saw the question pop up, how many of you have been impacted? My mind went to my LinkedIn feed and just what I've seen on LinkedIn, like in the past, we can even say week, just what I've seen, not even on just the layoff and hiring freeze side, but also just the response to seeing what employers are doing and how they're handling and in general, like feelings about it. So I thought about it in 2 ways, like the people that I've seen impacted and then the people impacted by seeing what is happening to other people, because I think we're all in either of those buckets. If we're not going through it, then we know a cousin, a friend, a former coworker or colleague that we've worked with that comes to mind that we're trying to support through or help navigate. So it definitely hit home for me. It was relevant for me. I could hit yes if I was responding.
Yeah, same sentiments. Quite a few consultation organizations. Again, big, massive organizations, from executive coaching to organizational transformation, product design, full stack engineering, DEI, and the current issues with layoffs. It's touching everything. One of the biggest things that I'm noticing is that a lot of folks just don't know what to do. They're just stuck. And they're really finding themselves asking the question, what do we do and where do we go from here? And this is really where remembering why we're here and what DEI is, which is really outcomes, point A to point B. And that relapse that we're all experiencing across every single industry is very much being felt. But that is why we're here, and that is why we're going to get into the thick of it today.
Great, and you can see that the results here, it looks like 91% of you all have said yes. You have been impacted by those layoffs, hiring freezes, and budget cuts, or you know someone that has been. I'm going to drop a question in the chat, and would love for you all to just noodle on this question a bit. And then if you can, put a response here. How has this impacted your organization? And what concerns are coming up for you, for other employees that you're hearing, or even for leaders at the organization? And we'll give you all a second to just drop that in the chat here.
Yeah, we're hearing a lot of that.
So it looks like fear is the biggest thing. Uncertainty, anxiety. Now the organization is becoming solely revenue focused.
I love that point about ERGs. We didn't even talk about that, but how it impacts ERGs and ERG leaders.
Mm.
Lots of perks, getting that resume ready.
Lots of getting my resume ready for sure. So I'm seeing a lot of lowering commitments is affecting people being tired, understaffed, overworked, under-resourced, which tends to bring up a conversation and a really, really challenging pain point of, you know, if past programming has failed or stalled, what do we do from here? And so that's a really good one.
Anyone else?
Mm.
Yeah, keep the responses coming. So Lou said basically how layoffs can set back cultural efforts and returning to white-centered cultures, as often the people who stay are the ones who historically maintain more power, right? Whenever organizational changes happen at scale, the communities that are marginalized or historically underrepresented or excluded are going to become excluded even more.
Oh, awesome. Renee, congratulations to you. This webinar will be perfect. Hopefully setting you up as you go into your DEI committee, you'll be able to take some notes on over.
Absolutely. Okay, should we move forward here?
Yep.
That's a nuanced one there, Julie.
Oh, yeah. Awesome. So I think we're in a really good spot right now to really just dig a little bit deeper. And hopefully what you all are noticing and seeing is that a lot of what you shared has been underscored and felt, not just, you know, by you and the people closest to you, but this is being felt everywhere across the nation. And I love that, Bryce, you mentioned earlier across industry. I think for a while, thinking, oh, this is just happening if you work in tech. But I think now we're seeing that it's not just tech specific. Everybody everywhere is feeling the weight of, if it's not a hiring freeze, then layoffs, or just the recession in general. People thinking about and anticipating what is coming next with the economy and what to expect. So I really just want to highlight for you, as businesses, as leaders really start to have conversations around how do we move forward? Economists right now are predicting that the recession will last 6 to 12 months, and that's a pretty heavy chunk of time. I am old enough to remember kind of the first, the recession that happened a few years ago. I was in high school at the time, and as a student, I remember hearing adults talk about it. So for me, those feelings are coming back up. I'm taking myself back to, you know, that time frame where I remember businesses laying folks off. I remember there was like a housing boom and then people couldn't afford housing. Like there were so many feelings. And so for businesses right now, we're seeing that this has led to a shift around, we're not going to focus on DEI, or we're going to deprioritize DEI to brace ourselves for everything that's going on. So specifically right now, what we're seeing is that there's a risk for businesses who don't continue to prioritize DEI. Like Letitia mentioned, a lot of people are saying, is this a nice to have? Or is it a must have? Should we keep doing this? Or is it just an added perk or bonus for our teams or our employees if we emphasize diversity, equity, and inclusion? If you all remember, 2020 was kind of the boom of DEI conversations. I remember locally where I live right near the University of Virginia in Charlottesville, Virginia. And every department within the university hired a diversity director. Every school. So I think across the university, they hired like 10 to 12 directors of diversity. And slowly over the past few months, I've seen those budgets get cut. I've seen people in those roles be moved around and shifted. So I'm seeing firsthand how a local business is grappling with well, we can kind of deprioritize diversity, equity, and inclusion. We don't really need to make it a priority right now. And when Glassdoor did a survey last year around these topics, 72% of respondents said that they view corporate DE&I programs positively. That number increases for folks who are kind of like in that Gen Z to early millennial era to 80% if you are between 18 and 34 years old. So I'm seeing a huge kind of red flag here that companies are deprioritizing the very thing that people value and that people hold dear. So from their perspective, it's a nice to have, but from the employee perspective, it's why we're here. When we see that you're sincere about DE&I efforts, it only champions us to want to be more involved and to want to be more included. And so really want you all to think about that too, as we've asked you some reflective questions already. As you think about companies who are now focusing on the bottom line, maybe it's your own company, you in your own role, and you're seeing how this impacts, overall engagement and turnover, really want to get you thinking here about what this means for you. Overall, companies are bracing themselves for financial downturn because they want to be fiscally conscious and a little bit fiscally conservative, but we now know that this is impacting just overall, employee engagement. And Bryce, would love to kind of invite you as well to kind of share just about economic uncertainty. I know you're doing all things business development as well. So as you think about that, like, what does that bring up for you here, just looking at the economy and recession?
For sure. Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I mean, at the end of the day, systems and processes are created by people, right? And a lot of these folks are looking to leaders to make decisions that are meaningful and thoughtful. But the issue is that leadership's very reactionary. So one of the things that has been really, really hard is to see the trendiness where they invest. Companies make very rash decisions to pull back on DEI and deprioritize it by inevitably the information they're receiving online and on the news. And the people who lose out most of all this dynamic are marginalized employees. That's women, that's Black folks, that's brown folks, that's disabled folks, that's the LGBTQ plus community. They understand that there's an ongoing problem of racism, sexism, transphobia, homophobia, ableism, all the isms. And what ends up happening is leaders are responsible for this and often naively think, it's because not an overt problem, we'll figure it out in time, and they will stall it. And this is really where it's been challenging for us, because at the end of the day, our organization, we have to be honest. We have to be honest with them. We have to make sure that they understand really what that outcomes-based strategy that they've implemented needs to do right now, even though they're responding. Pardon me, the absence of responding, they are reacting. And so I'll just stop right there, but that is becoming a very, very common thing and a real challenge for people leaders.
Thank you,
Yeah,
Brian.
thank you for that. Letitia, I don't want to cut you off. I'm sorry, I'm always eager to jump in. Go ahead.
No, keep going.
Well, I would love to just pose a poll question for y'all again, because Bryce kind of talked about the reacting instead of responding or actually listening to what's going on. So we would love just to ask you all, in the midst of not just the work piece, when we think about the economic uncertainty, how is it making you feel, specifically in terms of DEI at your organization? We shared those statistics with you and those quotes, but for you, on a scale from 1 to 5, what is this feeling like? How hard is it for you to kind of keep moving forward in your work, pushing those initiatives? Somebody earlier mentioned ERGs. I mean, I can't tell you the countless conversations we've had at Perfeqta with corporate leaders and executive sponsors about supporting and making sure ERGs have what they need. So maybe you're in that role. And right now you're trying to figure out, well, what do I do? How do I keep moving ERG efforts forward in the midst of everything? So would love for you all to respond on this poll, and we'll, share out and kind of debrief around what we're seeing here.
So it looks like the results are all over. For the one person who did say a 1, please give us the secrets here and let us know, how is it at a 1 right now? And that's great to hear. You may have some things you can share of what your organization is doing well. It looks like majority of you all said 3, so kind of in that middle mark. And then we're seeing most of you all select 4 or 5 for that. I also want to shout out Sean, saying that the company I work with currently has ERGs, but one of the issues is equitable funding for all ERGs. So we work with tons of ERGs across several organizations such as Industrious, Redfin. I know I'm going to leave some out. We facilitated some trainings with YouTube's ERG, Amazon's ERGs, and some of those challenges that also come up is compensation for ERG leaders, and that free labor that is going into this, not even just the physical labor, but even that energetic investment that it takes when that is not your 9-to-5 role. We've done a lot of work, not just only supporting ERGs, we also have an ERG toolkit that we created that does give a step-by-step course and outline on how to launch your ERG from beginning to end. But we know that ERGs can't be successful without significant financial investment as well as leadership buy-in. So thank you for calling that out.
Absolutely. You got to put your money where your word is. So, when you say you want to move something forward, it takes funding. And thank you all for being honest and for sharing that. And I also love to call out that the wide variety of results that Letitia shared just kind of also shows that everybody is experiencing this differently. Because every company culture, every leadership style, the way leaders are approaching this is different. So it's also just enlightening and helpful for us just to see that some people, we got the lucky folks at a 1 who were like, I am great moving forward, but then, really ranging across the board when it comes to just overall difficulty when moving forward.
So with that being said, and thank you so much, Tamara. Bryce, go ahead if you we're going to chime in here as well.
Oh, no, we're just going to rebuttal. No, I totally agree with that. There are nuances and organizations are at different places, and it can be a little irresponsible to attack and tell organizations what they need to do and where they're wrong without actually asking the right questions. Why is our workforce so burnt out? Why did all the DEI work we did before not work based upon the KPIs that leadership are creating? Can we walk through this together? What is another way for us to use our resources? Do we need to be scrappy and support in the interim while we regather our funding? It can feel very, very hard to want to also react like leadership. And that's kind of that impossible situation when, in fact, we need to be responding really, really thoughtfully. There's always something to do. That's the good news. Regardless if leadership says that we don't have it, we're not sure, great, let's talk. There's always something to do. If people don't have the energy or are burnt out, that's a sign. Let's start there. There are no lost causes. And so I just wanted to kind of add that.
Thank you so much, Bryce. So I'm sharing the results of the poll question. So if anyone is feeling like it is hard or extremely difficult at your organization, I hope that this helps you all feel validated in that experience, because most of you all did say on a scale of 1 to 5, you're at a 3, 4, and a 5. And as Bryce said, the work is never ending. With that being said, I'm excited to talk a little bit about where you can actually focus your efforts right now. So say you aren't sure what to do next, where to focus. I want to call out these 3 key areas here. The first one is feedback and trust. If you aren't sure where to start and you are in a role that does support employees, start with them. Start having conversations with them. Make sure that there is a consistent feedback loop for feedback to be shared, not even up the organization, but down the organization. It's really important for leaders to keep their eyes and ears open to what their employees are saying that they need, to what those worries are. This could look like sending out surveys, hosting conversations such as this, doing town halls that will allow your employees to ask those questions. And if you don't know what they need, simply ask them. Also, employees are looking for transparent communication, right? Understanding, where does my organization stand as it relates to DE&I right now? What are those commitments that we said in 2020, and are they still holding up now? Where are we cutting back our efforts, right? That is going to make sure that you are continuing to build that trust. And it is okay to say, hey, you know what? We don't have it all figured out, but go on this journey with us and walk with us along this. The next one is L&D. So no matter what happens, your employees still need to be upskilled. L&D is not going anywhere. And this is also something that we're seeing in the industry, in the market right now, is that companies still need to create training opportunities, developmental opportunities for their employees, especially if many employees are feeling that fear, overall overwhelm, anxiety, and stress about the stability of their role, or even trying to understand, does my company still care about DE&I? Show your employees that you care about them by bringing in external trainers, by giving them access to courses, on-demand trainings that still focus on these topics. If you do look at trainings, especially those on-demand courses, you can provide those and offer those at scale. All right. Also want to point out here that in LinkedIn's 2022 workplace report, they identified learning and growth as a #1 contributor to workplace culture, #1. And that is up from #9 in 2019. So somewhere along the way, employees have recognized that my learning, my development is extremely important for me to continue to grow and evolve at an organization. So if you need to focus on retention and engagement, don't forget about trainings and throw in some of those important DEI topics. The last one here is rewards and recognition. So it is important at this time to make sure your employees feel seen, heard, and valued. How can you do that? By building community, by focusing on supporting those employee resource groups. I know someone in the chat said that their organization went from 3 ERGs to 1 ERG. And with that being said, I hope that that 1 ERG is getting enough resources that they need to continue to build community. With the ERGs that we've supported across various organizations, they have told us that my involvement and participation as an ERG is that one thing that's keeping me here, because that is the one place where I feel community, where I feel safe. And I would love to hear Timur or Bryce, if you all have any thoughts.
Yeah, no, I'm just looking at the comments right now. Curtis, rewards and recognition is so important. What did Denzel Washington say? I'm leaving here with something. I'm leaving here with something. And that is really, really important. And then also Mark mentioning, it's aggravating that the feedback and trust step is often the hardest to initiate when it's so obvious that that's the first step. The conundrum is that implementing DEI is difficult, but the core concepts of DEI work, they're not rocket science, right? If you're early in the work, you can do a whole lot of good by asking basic questions, simple questions. How does the work I'm doing impact others from different demographics? And who wins and who loses from the work that I do? Who gets the resources, who doesn't, who loses, who wins? It's a double-edged sword, and it really does feel like an impossible situation. So I just wanted to call that out. At some point you'll find the inequities in a very, very simple way, and getting involved, getting curious, doing the learning together, you can begin to influence. But this goes back to the point of the rewards and the great theologian Denzel. I'm gonna have to leave you with something because this work does have functions that affect the business. And so I just wanted to kind of call that out.
We love a Denzel quote. Always right on time. I also just want to full moment of transparency and vulnerability. On the Perfeqta side, these are also conversations we're having as a team. So even in turn, I know if y'all are on this and you're like, oh my gosh, Perfeqta is giving these great ideas. Oh my gosh, everything is perfect over there and they don't have any challenges or worries. We also have to hold ourselves accountable to make sure we are doing these things. So as somebody who is leading culture internally for us, I also am checking myself. I'm checking Letitia. We're checking each other to make sure, are we getting feedback from our team? Are we giving them opportunities to learn and grow? Are we affirming them and recognizing them for the work that they're doing? Because these are all things that in the midst of concern in the midst of all the changes that life brings. And I mean, right now we're talking recession, but sometimes it was the pandemic, 2 years ago. Sometimes it's an employee had a baby. Sometimes it's somebody's facing sickness. Like, regardless of life events that happen, when we're kind of put into those unpredictable situations, these are typically the first three things that suffer. And the first three things that are like, well, we don't have time for any of this because we are just trying to make it and trying to get the business objectives done. So I also just want to, share that regardless of kind of where you are, you're not alone in this, because even, as the team that is supporting other companies and other folks across industries, we are also making sure that for our team, so that they can show up and serve, that we're trying to make sure we're checking these boxes and that we're getting feedback, that we're growing, and that we're not losing sight of their development as well. And it is hard. It is challenging because we're trying to equip everybody else. So we also have to make sure we're equipped too.
Tamara, thank you. I actually was just about to Slack you right before this webinar saying, oh, we got to talk about rewards and recognition. But I was like, you know what? We're focused on preparing for this webinar. We can talk about that after today. But I'm telling you all, these are the ongoing conversations that we're even having as a leadership team. So I am really excited to share something with you that we are just now starting to put out in the world. And you all are going to walk away or leave today's session with a lot of gems here now that you have a framework on how to assess your DEI maturity. So if you don't already have your notebook and your pen out, yes, we have Perfeqta pens too. So just slide in my DMs if you want one. I encourage you to please take tons of notes right now. We created this DEI framework for a number of reasons. One, we found that our client partners say in a span of 3 months, they wanted to launch employee resource groups, do a company-wide bias training, do inclusive leadership training, and launch a diversity counselor committee in 3 months, as well as change their policies around parental leave, around VTO. They wanted to look at their compensation and do a comp equity audit. They wanted to do that in 3 months, right? Now, you all are probably listening to me and saying, Letitia, there is no way that can happen, right? But you'd be surprised. The thing with DEI is that everything feels important, and it is important work. But when organizations overcommit, when they throw a ton of resources, that in turn results in folks getting overwhelmed that are carrying out this work because it takes time, it takes buy-in, and it is a journey. And we always say on our team with our clients is that you cannot boil the ocean, right? It is a marathon, not a sprint, right? With that being said, let me tell you a little bit about this DEI framework. And then we're also going to break down, how do you actually look at this and say, okay, but now, how do I actually measure where we are? I'm going to give you 6 core areas or categories of success that will allow you to determine where your organization falls. So there's 3 phases: structuring, which means you are getting it started, you're getting it going. Scaling means that you have a solid foundation, and now you're wanting to really integrate it across the organization. And then sustaining is your DEI strategy is set, and you're just revamping it, you're measuring those outcomes, your reporting and accountability is at its most optimal position. Now, that is the North Star, and that is where you want your organization to go. But realistically, it is okay if your organization is at stage 1, stage 2, perhaps it's stage 3. So let's talk about each of these. Stage 1 means we have not yet started. There might be chatter about DE&I, but there is nothing really solidified just yet. This is when you are starting from ground zero. Stage 2 is where an organization may have some DEI efforts. You might have some, an ERG here or there. You might have an annual bias training, and that's about it. Your leaders might talk about DEI a little bit, but there's nothing really set organizational wise. And this is where we have seen where DEI is still limited to compliance or risk mitigation, meaning let's get those racism trainings. Let's get those, anti-sexual harassment trainings going. Let's just do a check in the box, right? That is where DEI is a check in the box. Now, stage 3 is where you're really starting to make some traction here. There are ERGs, there's defined ownership. Employees actually understand what your organization's strategy is for DE&I, and there's clear owners. There might even be a budget here, right? And then as you get to stage 4, which is driving DE&I integration, you're starting to see that DE&I is embedded into the company's operations, meaning how are we serving our current employees through L&D efforts, through those rewards and recognition efforts. We have a solid communications and communications plan on how we're communicating DEI, not even just with current employees, even with our prospective employees. We have a solid inclusive or diversity recruiting strategy, not even just with current and prospective employees, but also with the community. So looking at those corporate social responsibility efforts, those community engagement efforts, right? Philanthropy efforts. Then also leaders are really, really driving this from the top down. And they're having conversations about it with their executive teams, even with their board. And then once you get to stage 5, that nurturing DE&I excellence, that means you're at your most optimal position. You have a full DE&I team, you have a large DE&I budget, you have resources that you've committed. You're tracking those outcomes, you're measuring success. There's a solid succession plan for your ERG leaders, your DEI teams, and that is ultimately where you want to go. So we do have a question, and we're going to just drop this question in the poll right now. And Tamara, I don't know if there was anything that you wanted to add here, or Bryce.
You summarized it. I mean, I love this framework because I think it, again, like the educator in me loves something like this because I think it's very clear on how you can assess where your organization is. And I think the theme that we see is kind of like in that beginning stage. When you're in stages 1, 2, and 3, a lot of your efforts are more so internal. And then 4 and 5 is when we start to see things get external. So it's not just an internal effort where you're training folks and then expecting them to hold each other accountable. 4 and 5 is really putting that forward out to the community, out to stakeholders, out to whoever your consumers are, and saying, we've been doing the work internally, now we're holding you accountable as our stakeholders, as part of the business, as the external piece of moving the company forward or moving the organization forward. And so I really love that. I think a lot of times people can look at this and get overwhelmed, like we had to be a 5 today. If that's you, please breathe. Not showing you this at all, telling you that you got to go figure out every answer right now, but also really giving you just, hopefully this has given you just an idea of how you can pace things out and see if we're 2, I kind of see what 3 looks like or 4 looks like. And I think it just explains things, very well and nice and concise.
Yeah. From an agency perspective, our stance really, as a talent development company, it's easy to prescribe without, really not knowing what an organization needs. And I think that's an issue that a lot of folks may have. But if we don't know what the organization needs, it's going to be very, very hard to understand what the next steps look like. We just can't fix services fast because we may not fix the right problems. And we'll focus on these inputs. An input that should be at step 5, we'll do at stage 1. And likewise. So it's really, really important to just kind of remember that, when we think of DEI, it's really outcomes based. Where are we going? And one of the 9 times out of 10, one of the reactions is, no, we're going to focus on input. And so this framework really helps both our organization and our client partners really assess where are we and what is the likelihood of going to that next step. And, let's call it what it is. Relapses do happen. They happen, and it's frustrating. It is extremely frustrating, especially if you've had a lot of time with the organization and put so much into it. But again, you have to start asking the questions. What would you do to fix it? What can be implemented from policy, processes, angle at a high level, right? We're going to probably need some support from middle managers, right? To support new behaviors, talks and conversations, to help mature momentum and iteration. And so this really allows us and our partners to really identify where to start.
Curtis, thank you for, I want to call out your response. In the chat, you said you thought you all were further along, but you're not. And so we shared this, we did a whole series of trainings for one of our client partners. And I remember us asking them the same question. Like, if you saw this, if you had to, rate yourself on a scale from 1 to 5, where would you say you were? And I think like so many people put 5, like 90% of people said, oh, we're at a 5. And then we explained the criteria. And they were like, oh, just kidding. Maybe a 2 or 3, because internally they realized they were doing the work. But when it came to the external or holding folks accountable for it, that is kind of where the shift was. So like, we're doing all the learning, but nobody knows we're doing it, or it's not reflected in any of our client relationships or our external partnerships. So I love that you were able to use this and kind of see, maybe I thought we were at a 4, but we might not be, or, we do see opportunity here for growth and for us to expand. I always say there's no gold star in the DE&I journey. So if you're, doing this work does require that consistent effort. There's no end journey where you get the certificate and everybody's all inclusive and you just get to throw your hands up and be done with it. It takes consistent effort. It's a long journey. And so also be encouraged to know that if you have space for growth, that's a good thing, because now you can start to think about taking some of that action.
So I'm going to end the poll on that note, and let me just share these results here. It looks like majority of you all, about 44%, said stage 3. The next largest group was stage 2. And also seeing a few responses for stage 1 and stage 4, and no one said stage 5. So it is great that we've had that moment of realization and understanding that, we are not at that stage 5, but can you get there? Absolutely. With that being said, we're going to shift now into the next slide. And something I want to point out here is that with each of these 6 kind of success criteria you see here on the slide, your organization will have a different maturity for each of these. You might see that you're a bit further along, maybe on employee experience, but then not really as far along as you would like to be on accountability and reporting. So definitely just kind of jot this down, take some notes on the areas that you are feeling like your organization is doing really well at, but where maybe you haven't put a lot of effort and attention to just yet. That could be an area of focus for 2023. So Tamara, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Letitia. And thank you for saying that, because regardless, I think, of where your organization is, every company or entity has its own strengths. And so as you see up here, we have governance, talent programs, employee experience and culture, communications, stakeholder engagement, and accountability and reporting. So looking at these, you may find that, for example, for governance includes describing the existing systems in each respective stage of maturity that drive your organization's efforts. So this is going to look at ERGs, DEI headcount, who's owning that, really the oversight of how things are moving forward. So you might find, oh, we're at a stage 5 when it comes to governance. But then when it comes to talent programs, which is the programs that are really driving your HR and your people team, how are you developing that diverse talent pipeline? How are you retaining the employees that you bring on? I know a lot of times companies will say, we're looking to hire more diverse candidates, and then they quit. You bring in Black and brown candidates and they only last for 3 months at the organization. So you might find we might be a 4 or 5 in governance, but when it comes to talent programs, we might be a 1 or a 2. And so really sharing this success criteria so that you can start to think about, where can you grow? Where are those specific areas for you that raise some questions or opportunity? And when you look at employee experience and culture, my jam, I love it. How are you programming that L&D that we talked about, that so many people value, that is really what is keeping employees around? How are you creating opportunities for folks to grow and develop? Communications, I find is a really big one, especially as folks think about external opportunities for DE&I. So not just internal emails and newsletters that go out, but really, how is your communication strategy for external partners, really focusing on diversity, equity, and inclusion? I love that at Perfeqta, we've worked with, several client partners around their inclusive communication strategy and giving them tips and suggestions around how to be more inclusive and how they approach their comms. And it's an area, I think, of diversity, equity, and inclusion that we don't talk about enough, but that is so necessary when you're thinking about just overall engagement. These last two, stakeholder engagement and then accountability and reporting. So your stakeholders are really anybody internally or externally as it relates to DE&I. So that's your employees, vendors, community at large, or even your customers. How are you engaging with them? And are you doing it in a way that emphasizes diversity, equity, and inclusion? One of our client partners that we did trainings with, we specifically talked about how they can implement diversity, equity, and inclusion in their sales conversations. So not so much internally, because they were like, we're doing the work internally, we're there, but how do we now bring that into a sales conversation with clients that we're trying to sign? How do we make sure that the way we approach client conversations forward face, outwardly into the community, how do we do that in a way that is inclusive and really positions us to center them and their needs and kind of decenter us as a company? And then accountability and reporting is, for a lot of folks, the toughest part, because kind of once you do the work, you got to track it. And you got to make sure that, like, that policy you put in 2 years ago that nobody read and just kind of went up on the shelf, who's checking on that? Who's coming back to make sure that if you said, we want 80% of our leadership team to reflect folks from diverse backgrounds, who's holding, your people team or your HR team accountable for that? If you said we want every employee to have robust training around diversity, equity, and inclusion, what does that mean? Who's tracking that? And I, as a classroom teacher at heart, we used to always say, if you don't track it, you can't change it. And what you measure doesn't grow. If you don't measure it, it won't grow. So you have to be able to track what you are trying to change. And you have to be holding your leadership and your teams accountable to move this work forward. Otherwise, you look up and it's been 3 years and that fancy plan is just fancy and it has the great graphics and nobody has actually done the work. Bryce, Letitia, feel free if I've missed anything, or to jump in and add if I missed an important component.
No, I was actually just going to ask the question, for our learners, for our community here, which of the 6-point success criteria that we're showcasing here do you believe your company should prioritize first? Just wanted to give you a few seconds to kind of answer that question.
So from Diamond said stakeholder engagement and talent programs, absolutely. You all will see a lot of these really go hand in hand. And Tamara mentioned earlier, maybe you have a great employee experience, but if you're not talking about that, if you're not communicating that, what happens to the new employees that are joining your organization? Is DEI being embedded into onboarding, right? I also want to call out Aaron's comment, Lou's, Lindsay. Aaron said the experience and culture component. Buy-in is so important to growth and longevity. Absolutely. Something that we talk about with our client partners is what will buy-in look like for different stakeholders, because everyone has a different level of understanding, engagement, and overall attachment to this work, from leaders to employees, some management to the early career talent. So thank you for sharing that. And then Lou said, always culture first, because it's the environment in which everyone and everything operates. Thank you. Lindsay said, definitely talent programs, accountability, and reporting. Also, you will see that as your organization matures and evolves as DEI maturity, there's going to be a stronger focus on stakeholder engagement and accountability and reporting. And it is okay if your organization is not at a stage 4 to begin reporting on those outcomes and to begin measuring that success. And then also governance. Our organization struggles with communication, especially upward communication, and that's a huge disconnect. Governance is huge. And with the work that we have done with supporting our clients, we can create the best DEI strategic roadmap that will say, here's what you're going to do year over year and quarter over quarter. But guess what? If they don't have that governance structure set up, who's going to carry out the work, right? You can have the actions, you can have the step by step, but if you don't have the right owners, if you don't have the right resources, if they're not being held accountable, if they're not getting what they need, it's going to be very hard to meet the objectives. And so that governance is something that we really focused on with our client partners now. Before they even say, hey, Perfeqta team, we want you all to create a roadmap. We'll say, what does your governance look like? Because if you don't have a committee, if you don't have a council, right? If you don't have a core group, not just ERGs, not just your people and talent team, but if you don't have a core group of folks who can support this work and this labor, it's not going to be successful long-term. So thank you all for shouting that out. So now we're going to talk about evolving DE&I in your organization. Now that we have presented this framework to you all, we presented the 6-point success criteria, and it's great to hear that you all are finding this helpful. Let's give you some tangible things to think about so that you can really move those efforts forward. So Bryce, I'll turn it over to you.
I appreciate that. So again, DEI is really a journey from point A to point B. So really evolving DEI in your organization, we have found, one of the things, look at what is already in place and explore how you can make it more impactful. We do work with organizations and client partners that have tried implementing with, consultants or consulting agencies. And again, things just didn't work out. If I can be extremely transparent, sometimes it's just not the right fit, right? And we've had to have come in and audit. And so you really do have to look at what is already in place and explore how you can make it more impactful and transition from there. Conducting a readiness and prioritization exercise, consider quick wins in major projects. Again, sometimes we need to understand what we've done. Really defining point A, right? Taking organizations from a homogeneous point A to a more equitable, inclusive point B. We have to do this. Same thing with onboarding a DEI partner to provide best practices and lessons learned. At some point along the way, that does become necessary. One of our client partners who we've had the pleasure of working with, going to be going on 2 years soon, they're at that place. It's easy to get distracted with what's already planned versus things coming up. Again, this is really where comms and understanding and defining point A and defining point B in that DEI journey really becomes super helpful. Watch your pace, be committed for the long haul instead of quick results. If you can't define the outcomes you're going towards, how are you supposed to get there, right? And so we have to watch our pace and understand really what those results look like over time. And then determining the ongoing education that needs to happen up and down the org. Again, relapses happen, and we have to just start asking ourselves the questions, what can we fix? What can be implemented from a policy or processes angle? Support is going to be needed from the middle manager side, talks and conversations to help mature momentum and iterate. And just be transparent. People can smell it. People can smell the what. And really for us, one of the hardest things, and all of you have shared it, is, what does it mean to be a better organization for us? What does that look like? What problems have we solved? What's the composition of our workforce? Because we've been talking so much. And again, we can't be reactive in this work. We have to be extremely responsive and find a way to hold accountability. And we can only do it through those systems and through those policies and through talking. You'll need to answer those questions and reverse engineer them. Otherwise, the work is actually not happening. And so really, as you're evolving, it's going to be nuanced, and you have to read the room, and you have to be thoughtful in responding based upon really those frameworks.
Bryce, thank you so much for that. And the thing I want to double down on here is that caring about DE&I is not enough. You actually have to put some actions in place. With that being said, I shared our resource with you all, which is our DEI framework. So you can download that from the chat here. We'll also be sending that out after today's webinar. And now we're going to go ahead and shift into a Q&A. I hope that you all enjoyed this conversation. If you enjoyed it, drop a yes in the chat. If you didn't, drop a no in the chat, but I don't think you would be here if you were going to say no.
If it's a no, just give us some data. That's all. Just give some data.
Yeah, give us some feedback here. But again, we want to host these monthly conversations so that we can build community. And I want to thank you all for the work that you do. Let's make sure, and follow us on LinkedIn, connect with all of us on LinkedIn. Our DMs are open. We would love to hear from you. Let us know what additional topics you all would want to hear from us in the future so that we can keep this conversation going. Next month's topic is going to be around how HR people talent teams can continue to build DEI momentum to create workplace flexibility, to increase professional development, to focus on recruitment and engagement of employees, even if those resources are cut. So I want you all to come back next month and we'll send out information about that as well. If you have questions for us, go ahead and drop it in that Q&A box. There's a Q&A box at the bottom of the screen here. I guess I should shift to the last slide. Drop those questions in the Q&A box here so that we can get your questions answered. Let's leave here with a collective understanding. The problem here is that with this blooming recession, with some budget and resource cuts, DEI is still important. As employees are leaving organization or as we are facing that fear, anxiety, and stress, this is the most important time and effort to make sure that you're building that inclusive and equitable workplace. So thank you for joining today. If you find that your organization is actually ready to put those actions in place based on some of the things we talked about, Bryce has dropped in the chat here a way for you to contact us. Again, we would love to hear from you all and support you with your organization's efforts. Brett, I will drop the framework in here in the chat so that you can download it. But if you scroll up in the chat, you should be able to see it. All right, I'm going to stop sharing screen since my slides are kind of messing up here, but this is a great time for us to segue into our Q&A. So we're going to go ahead and do that. If we can also, for our panelists, please drop your LinkedIn profiles here as well so that you all can connect with us on LinkedIn. And we're going to start taking some questions from the audience. Okay, there's an anonymous question we want to answer. So the question is, been following you before the rebrand and absolutely love seeing your growth. Any lessons learned on DE&I while scaling? Tamara, I would love to turn this question over to you since you're supporting us with culture and we're, of course, everything we do, equity is at the heart of it. But we'd love to hear from you on any lessons learned as we've been scaling as an organization.
Ooh, putting me on the spot. Okay. I think the biggest one, which we already underscored a little bit here, has been to take our time and to not feel like we need to rush. We have a team of very action-oriented folks, and so we're always thinking about doing. And so it's also hard for us to kind of pause and realize we can go slower as a team. And I do think it's because we're always getting results for other people. And so for us, when it comes to our internal team, we're like, okay, we know all the things, we got to do it, we're going to jump on it. But I think we've also seen value in just slowing things down a little bit, really taking time to reflect, reset as needed, hold each other accountable, but also to really keep trying things and seeing how they stick and how they feel instead of always jumping to problem solve or find a solution for things, which I think, applies to anybody having conversations or thinking about DEI efforts, especially when it comes to scaling, because it can be hard to figure out where to focus your efforts and to focus your intentions and your hard work. So I would say that's something that I'm always thinking about. And, we've already said it, don't forget about the people. A question that I've always asked myself as coming from a nonprofit background and doing work that is mission oriented. And so you always focus on the mission, but I always say, who helps the helpers? Who is actually helping the people that are required to help others? And so I always say you got to start with focusing on encouraging and making sure your team has their cup full before they are required to kind of go out and pour into other people.
I'm actually going to rebuttal on that. So I'm not sure if anyone is familiar with Lily Zing, but one of the things that Lily said recently was that, you have to know what you're trying to fix in DEI before you find the right tool for the job. And I think there's something to be said even from that question. We can't just make decisions because we feel like it and fling it at the public, hoping it will fix or be of value. We have to understand what we're trying to do or what we're trying to fix. We have to understand what we're trying to go to, and then we have to understand what we're trying to achieve. And really, that's actually why we created Perfeqta Academy as well as an organization in creating technical tools, because we recognize specifically with ERGs, they were in an impossible situation where they wanted to grow, but they needed resources, yet the ceiling of their budget was unfortunate. Is probably the best word. And then from there, you can start to pick and choose interventions, and that might vary. But for us, we've always been very, very iterative. Our ears are much more open than our mouths, and so that's really something that I definitely consider to be a helpful ideal.
Yeah, and I want to also just shout out our leadership team for what they've shared. The other thing I want to add before we move to the next question is actually getting feedback. So we have a organization where we often ask our team for feedback on what's working, what's not working, what could we be doing better as an organization. And so it is important to not just get so caught up in execution of the work, but actually make sure that what you are actually executing on is effective, right? That might need to be done anonymously through surveys, but also think about ways where sometimes DEI happens really at the top, and it's such a top heavy thing where you can embed DEI into your performance review conversations. You can embed them into your team meetings. You can embed them into your one-on-ones. So kind of find those even smaller micro touch points to embed DE&I. There were a couple of questions just around our services, and I do just want to answer those questions. Do you offer services for orgs that are not yet aware of DE&I? Thinking senior leadership training, motivation, kickoff services. We absolutely do. And one of our most newest offerings that we created was helping organizations create a DE&I vision. This is for organizations that know they want to start the work, but they just don't know how or where to start. The passion is there, but the effort needs to match, but they're not sure of what would success look like. So that is something that we are offering to a couple of our clients, which we're really excited about in Q1, LegalZoom and then Wilden. And so if you're interested in hearing more about that, that's a great place if you're wanting to just start on those efforts, or maybe you've gotten a little bit stuck and you want to figure out how to get unstuck. There is also a question around, do you ever get hired to help an org address super sensitive DE&I issue? Yes, we do. So we dropped that link in here to contact us. Bryce, if you could drop that link in here one more time, contact us directly and let us know what you need. I mean, we'd be happy to talk with you to see if we can support you there. Now, I do want to call it a question here from Mark. And we have time for a couple of more questions after that. So Mark's question is, how does community engagement compare to internal initiatives, hiring, development, and learning in terms of engagement and DE&I objectives? A couple of things come up for me here, and then we'd love to hear from our team. With that being said, community engagement. So how does that relate to recruiting, right? We are now seeing that even if a company has a hiring freeze or there's layoffs, your company is going to begin hiring again, right? Hiring is going to pick back up. With that being said, this is a great time if hiring has slowed down to really think about that inclusive recruiting strategy. But whether someone is from an historically excluded community or not, we're seeing that job seekers are still very interested in what an organization does as it relates to DE&I, and that they are also passionate about serving the community, and they want to make sure they work with an organization whose values align in that way. So community engagement is great from an employer branding standpoint. The other thing with community engagement is that, say you want to increase your efforts on engagement of, Black or Latinx employees, being able to partner with organizations externally in the community, that will absolutely show that your organization is in support of those communities themselves too. And that will help to increase employee engagement. We're finding that, and we saw this happen at the beginning of the pandemic, is that we are, and I think I heard this like April of 2020, we are no longer working from home, we're living at work. So we're seeing that our work lives and our personal lives are really commingled now. And so as much as you can provide those efforts for where your employees can get engaged in things that they're passionate about through the workplace, that in turn is going to support your internal initiatives. There's a lot more I could say there, but I hope that gives you a little bit. Tamara, Bryce, feel free to jump in there as well.
I'm so sorry. Actually, I'm having a bit of trouble posting the link. Letitia,
I'll drop it in here.
I appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Letitia, you mic drop. I think you summarized it perfectly. It also takes me back to a podcast I was listening by a company called Culture Amp that does a ton of studies around culture. And when they interviewed a company that just had like amazing results when they like surveyed their employees on engagement. And I remember the leader of that company saying it was because we took the focus off of just trying to support our employees at work, and we really tried to support them with life. And we took the focus off of just performance and like, how do we support the whole employee? And she was like, it made us look at community engagement. It made us look at how do external partners see us. It made us look at, when are we hosting our learning and development events? Do they always happen at the same time? Are the only opportunities we have to come together a happy hour, which may not bring in somebody who is, on a sobriety journey, or may not be good for a parent picking up their kid from daycare. Like, we just had to stop looking at, we just are trying to support you to show up to work, but versus we're hiring humans, and how do we support humans to be well and to be whole? And so when I think about all the things we've covered today, whether that's community engagement to the internal piece of hiring and retention and overall development, I don't think you can move forward in your DEI journey without first realizing that all of these areas are necessary to evaluate, to revisit, and as Bryce said, to really consider how you're doing and what you need to change and how you want to go about changing it.
Yeah, and my small rebuttal to that is, broken record, there's a nuance there. Really, the nature of the work itself is really long-term systemic change effort to achieve DEI as outcomes. So if that is true, and we're making that executive decision together, then one would say that internal initiatives have a very specific priority. Then we can get to DEI objectives. And sometimes there might be, separate things like trainings at a high level. How does a training help us get to an outcome adjacent to the objective, adjacent to these engagements? And so, yeah, the nature of the work itself is a bit long-term, and those aspects help as a collective and don't really exist in a vacuum.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And we have one last question before we wrap up. So I am going to bring this question up. This is an anonymous question that we received, which is great. So if you are working at a global organization or large organization and you want to dial down into local, regional, or national efforts, this is a question that I think will be helpful for all of us. The question here is, how do you tailor a DEI strategy to your business area when you have received a global structure that doesn't necessarily cover all the needs of your specific region? So I'm going to bring that question up so you all can see it. One, it is necessary for you to have a DEI strategy for your region, because there are cultural nuances that exist. We do have a client that is based in the insurance industry that is an international organization, and they have specific goals that have been set from the global office that we are now kind of dialing in and taking that into consideration for the North America region of the organization that we work with. Now, if that is not happening, it could be worth having a conversation with leadership to let them know, hey, this is great on what you all have globally, but there are still some nuances that we want to take into consideration for our specific region. If you think about that 6-point success criteria, you may see that at the global level, maybe they're more focused on accountability and reporting, but they don't really have good eyesight onto what's happening in your organization regionally. And that's where you can bring in that efforts. It really is a win-win situation when you can say, I see what you all are doing on the global level. I want to help you achieve those goals by breaking this down regionally so that we can get there, right? And this is actually a challenge that we've seen happen, especially before 2020, is that orgs had some DEI efforts and things happening at the top, but then no one really knew what was happening. And DEI impacts everyone at the organization, all levels. It is not okay for an org to have this, global DE&I kind of steering co, and then there's no communications going down, or employees aren't able to provide that feedback up the organization. So we find it very, very beneficial. Take a look at our framework. Think about the areas in which regionally or nationally you do need to dial in those efforts. Create a business case and present that back to your executive team on how it's beneficial for your region, but it's also going to help them achieve their global efforts. Anything else that you two would add?
Yeah, I think I think it might be worth. I've seen this from an organization here in North Carolina that has a massive global footprint, and I can really appreciate how they're measuring organizational health. And so during that business case that Letitia suggested, it might be worth really making a case for that. What is our organizational health in relevance to our outcomes and relevance to our region, and the resilience required for us to actually get to the outcomes that you've communicated. So I just wanted to kind of add that it's something we've seen recently.
Wonderful. So any closing words? Timmer, you always have a word.
Don't look at me. I think the biggest thing that I can do is just reassure all of you, because you're here, obviously, because this has been something that has been on your mind. We've talked about kind of the feelings of fear and worry and anxiety. And so I really just want to affirm each of you for taking time out, for showing up, and for saying, this is something that I value. It is important to me. And I'm showing up because this work matters, despite everything else that's going on. Please continue. Don't give up the work. Like Letitia said, if you showed up today, you're officially part of the family. So we expect to see you back here again for the next one. Follow us. If you're not following us on LinkedIn, reach out to us, connect with us. Obviously, that downloadable resource does give you an in-depth look at our framework, but also you've heard a little bit about the work that we've done around trainings and development. And I think the beauty of what we offer at Perfeqta is really just meeting companies where they are, meeting organizations where they are, being honest, having those open and honest conversations, and then trying to move folks forward. And so hopefully, regardless of wherever you may find yourself falling on that framework scale, you feel encouraged and affirmed that you can keep going and moving forward.
Thank you. Thank you all so much. Thank you to Tamara and Bryce for sharing your wisdom and knowledge. I also want to shout out the Perfeqta team for making this happen and for joining today. We are really excited to roll out our DEI framework, and please use it. Right, this is a free resource. Use it. Meet with your leadership team. Meet with your council. meet with your ERG leaders, and really think about what you can get started on today. I applaud you all for doing this work and for being here. And I can't wait to see you all. It sounds like we should keep doing this. So we're going to keep doing it. And we're going to see you all in February with the new topic. Let us know what topics you want to hear from us. We always want to support this community. So with that being said, I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your Tuesday and a wonderful rest of your week. Thank you all so much.
Don't have a good day. Have a
Thanks,
great
y'all. Thanks, Bryce.
Thank you, Bryce.